Behind the gilded gates of Kensington Palace, where centuries of royal tradition meet the harsh glare of modern scrutiny, a future king faces his greatest test yet. In the digital age where a single photograph can topple governments and a leaked conversation can destroy dynasties, Prince William stands at the crossroads of duty and survival. The year 2026 was supposed to mark a new chapter of stability for the British monarchy. Instead, it became the year that threatened to unravel everything the House of Windsor had spent decades rebuilding. As storm clouds gather over the royal family, whispers echo through the corridors of power about scandals that could shake the very foundations of the crown. But this is not just another tale of royal drama. This is the story of a man who must choose between protecting his family and preserving an institution that has endured for over 1,000 years. As cameras flash and headlines scream, as protesters gather and Parliament debates, Prince William discovers that being heir to the throne means more than wearing a crown. It means becoming the shield that stands between chaos and continuity. In the shadows, his protection detail works tirelessly, not just guarding his physical safety, but safeguarding the future of the monarchy itself. Every decision carries weight. Every public appearance becomes a battlefield, and every private moment risks becoming tomorrow's scandal. The future of the British royal family hangs in the balance, and at its centre stands a prince who must prove he has what it takes to be king, not just in title, but in the crucible of crisis that will define his reign. Before it, even the morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of Kensington Palace, as Prince William adjusted his tie for the third time. The mirror reflected a man who had aged beyond his years, carrying the weight of expectation that came with being second in line to the throne. Today was different, though. Today, he could feel the electric tension that preceded a storm. Detective Inspector Sarah Morrison stood outside his study, her earpiece crackling with urgent communications from Scotland Yard. As head of his personal protection unit, she had seen many challenges in her 15 years of service, but the intelligence reports crossing her desk this week painted a picture that made her stomach clench with worry. The threats weren't just coming from the usual suspects anymore. "Your Royal Highness," she said as William opened the door, "we need to discuss the security briefing for today's engagement." William nodded, noting the tension in her voice. Sarah had never been one for dramatics. If she was concerned, there was good reason. They walked together through the hallway adorned with portraits of his ancestors, each face a reminder of the legacy he carried. "What's the situation?" he asked, settling into the leather chair that had been his grandfather's favorite. Sarah spread a tablet across the mahogany desk, her fingers moving efficiently across the screen. "Sir, we've intercepted communications suggesting coordinated protests at today's hospital visit. But that's not what concerns me most." The screen displayed a series of social media posts, each one more inflammatory than the last. Hashtags demanding royal accountability had been trending for weeks, but the tone had shifted dramatically overnight. What started as calls for transparency had evolved into something much more dangerous. "There are suggestions of leaked documents," Sarah continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Internal palace communications, financial records, personal correspondence. Someone with access is feeding information to journalists and activist groups." William felt his jaw tighten. The palace had weathered scandals before, but in the age of social media, even the smallest transgression could be amplified into a crisis that threatened the monarchy's very existence.
His phone buzzed with a message from his father's private secretary.
The king wanted to see him immediately. The walk to Clarence House took 20 minutes through the secure corridors that connected the royal residences. William's mind raced as he considered the implications. If someone inside their trusted circle was betraying confidences, it meant nowhere was safe. Every conversation, every decision, every moment of vulnerability could be weaponized against them. King Charles looked exhausted as William entered his study. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his normally impeccable posture showed the strain of recent weeks. "William," he said without preamble, "we have a problem that goes beyond anything we've faced." On the king's desk lay printed copies of documents that made William's blood run cold. Bank statements showing charitable donations that could be misinterpreted as political interference. Email exchanges discussing public appearances that, taken out of context, seemed calculated and manipulative. Personal notes about family matters that had no business being public. "How?" William asked simply. "We don't know yet," his father replied, his voice heavy with disappointment. "But someone we trust has decided we're expendable. The question is whether we can contain this before it destroys everything our family has worked to rebuild." The implications were staggering. Since the tumultuous years following Diana's death, The royal family had carefully rebuilt their reputation through decades of careful public service and measured responses to criticism. They had modernized the monarchy while maintaining its traditions, becoming symbols of stability in an increasingly chaotic world. Now, someone was systematically dismantling that progress. William's phone rang. It was Sarah, and her voice carried an urgency that made his pulse quicken. "Sir, we need to return to Kensington immediately. There's been a development." The drive back felt endless despite the police escort clearing their path. William watched London pass by through bulletproof glass, noting the protesters already gathering in Parliament Square. Their signs demanded investigations into royal finances, calling for accountability and transparency. Some carried more extreme messages questioning whether Britain needed a monarchy at all in the modern age. Back at Kensington Palace, Sarah had assembled her team in the secure conference room. Maps of London covered the walls alongside photographs and documents that painted a picture of coordinated opposition. "Sir," she began, "we've identified at least 3 separate groups planning demonstrations today. But more concerning is this." She handed him a tablet showing a website that had launched just hours earlier. Royal Secrets Exposed displayed copies of the same documents his father had shown him, accompanied by inflammatory commentary that twisted their meaning into evidence of corruption and manipulation. "The website is hosted overseas, making it difficult to shut down," Sarah explained. "But the real problem is the source. These documents came from inside palace systems. Someone with high-level access is feeding information to whoever is running this operation."
William studied the faces of his protection team, people who had dedicated their lives to safeguarding the royal family bee.
The thought that one of them might be the source was almost unbearable. But he had learned that trust was a luxury he could no longer afford completely. "What about the hospital visit?" he asked. "I recommend cancellation," Sarah replied immediately. "The intelligence suggests this is coordinated with the document release. They want footage of protests and confrontation to accompany the leaked materials." William considered his options. Cancelling would look like weakness, feeding the narrative that the royal family was out of touch and unwilling to face legitimate criticism. But proceeding meant walking into a potentially explosive situation where a single photograph or video clip could provide ammunition for his enemies. His personal assistant knocked and entered with a message that changed everything. "Sir, the Prime Minister's office has called an emergency meeting. They want to discuss the impact on the upcoming Commonwealth Summit." The pieces of a larger puzzle began falling into place. The Commonwealth Summit, scheduled for next month, represented months of careful diplomatic preparation. Leaders from 54 nations would gather in London, with the royal family playing a crucial ceremonial role. If the monarchy appeared unstable or compromised, it could undermine Britain's position on the world stage. "This isn't random," William realized aloud. "Someone is orchestrating this to coincide with the summit. They want to embarrass us when the global spotlight is brightest." Sarah nodded grimly. "That's our assessment as well, which means this is likely just the beginning." As if summoned by her words, William's phone buzzed with an alert from the palace press office. Another wave of documents had just been released, these focusing on his personal correspondence with government officials. The headlines were already writing themselves: "Future King's secret political interference and royal family's hidden agenda exposed."
William felt the weight of history pressing down on him.
Every king and queen before him had faced their own crises, from wars and rebellions to scandals and constitutional challenges. But none had faced the relentless, instantaneous judgment of social media, where context could be stripped away and truth became whatever narrative gained the most traction. The irony wasn't lost on him that his great-great-great-grandmother, Queen Victoria, had weathered Republicans calling for the end of the monarchy after her prolonged mourning for Prince Albert. The royal family had survived 2 world wars, the abdication crisis, and the tumultuous aftermath of Diana's death. They had modernized and adapted, becoming symbols of service and continuity. Now, in 2026, they faced an enemy that was both ancient and utterly modern. The fundamental question of whether hereditary power had any place in a democratic society, weaponized by technology that could amplify every criticism and broadcast every mistake to billions of people instantly. William walked to his window, looking out at the gardens where his children often played. Whatever was coming, he knew it would test not just his resolve, but the very foundations of the institution he was born to inherit. The storm was just beginning, and he would need every ounce of strength, wisdom, and courage to navigate through it, while protecting everything he held dear. The future of the monarchy might well depend on the decisions he made in the days ahead begins. The emergency meeting at number 10 Downing Street felt more like a war council than a diplomatic consultation. Prime Minister Rebecca Stevens sat across from William, her face drawn with the exhaustion of someone who had been fielding international phone calls since dawn. The leaked documents hadn't just embarrassed the royal family. They had created a diplomatic crisis that threatened to overshadow months of careful preparation for the Commonwealth Summit. "Your Royal Highness," the Prime Minister began, her voice carefully controlled. "We need to discuss the implications of these leaks." The Canadian Prime Minister has already expressed concerns about the appearance of royal influence in political matters. Australia's Republican movement is calling for immediate withdrawal from the Commonwealth. William absorbed the information with the practiced calm he had learned from years of public service, but inside, anger burned at the systematic destruction of relationships his family had spent generations building. The leaked correspondence, taken out of context, made routine ceremonial duties appear as political manipulation. "What do we know about the source?" he asked. Home Secretary David Nash leaned forward, consulting his tablet. "Our investigation has narrowed it down to approximately 12 individuals with access to the systems that house these documents. All have undergone extensive background checks, but we're conducting deeper analysis of their personal communications and financial records." The thought of his trusted staff being subjected to such scrutiny made William uncomfortable, but the alternative was allowing the leaks to continue until they destroyed the monarchy entirely. "How long until you have answers?" 48 hours at most, Nash replied. "But sir, there's something else you should know. The sophistication of this operation suggests professional involvement. This isn't just a disgruntled employee. Someone is coordinating this assault on the Crown with significant resources and expertise." Sarah Morrison, who had accompanied William to the meeting, spoke for the first time. "We've traced some of the social media amplification to bot networks operating from multiple countries. The hashtags trending against the royal family are being artificially boosted by thousands of fake accounts. The implications were staggering. Foreign interference in British politics was nothing new, but using the monarchy as a leverage point represented a sophisticated understanding of how to destabilize the country's institutions. William realized they weren't just fighting gossip or legitimate criticism. They were facing a coordinated attack designed to undermine Britain's soft power on the international stage. The question Prime Minister Stevens continued is how we respond. Do we go on the defensive and wait for the storm to pass, or do we take the initiative? William considered his options. His instinct was to maintain the dignified silence that had served the royal family well through previous crises. But this felt different. The digital age demanded faster responses, and silence could be interpreted as admission of guilt. "I want to proceed with the hospital visit," he announced, surprising everyone in the room. "But with modifications to our security posture and a clear media strategy." Sarah immediately protested. "Sir, the intelligence suggests significant risk of confrontation." "That's exactly why I need to go," William replied firmly. "If I hide now, it validates their narrative that we're out of touch and afraid to face legitimate concerns. The royal family serves the people, not the other way around." The Prime Minister nodded slowly. "It's risky, but it could work in our favor if handled correctly. A show of confidence and accessibility might counter some of the damage." Plans were rapidly adjusted. The hospital visit would proceed, but with enhanced security and a carefully planned media strategy. William would make a brief statement acknowledging public concerns while reaffirming his commitment to service and transparency. More importantly, they would announce the establishment of an independent review of royal communications and financial practices. The drive to the hospital took them through streets lined with protesters. William watched from behind bulletproof glass as hundreds of people carried signs demanding royal accountability. The crowd was diverse, ranging from young activists to older citizens who remembered more turbulent times in the monarchy's recent history. "Quite a turnout," Sarah observed grimly. William studied the faces of the protesters, noting that while many seemed genuinely angry, others appeared to be following a script. Professional agitators were scattered throughout the crowd, directing chants and positioning themselves for optimal camera coverage. The hospital itself had been secured, but the entrance was surrounded by media crews and protesters pressed against police barriers. As William's car approached, the noise level rose dramatically. Signs waved overhead, "Royal transparency now, end the monarchy, and investigate William's influence." Margaret Hartley, the hospital's chief administrator, met William at the secure entrance. Despite the chaos outside, her smile was genuine. "Your Royal Highness, thank you for coming despite the circumstances. The children's ward staff were devastated when we thought you might have to cancel." The reminder of why he was there helped center William's focus. Inside the hospital, away from the protesters and cameras, Real people were dealing with real problems. A 7-year-old girl battling leukemia didn't care about political controversies. She just wanted someone to read her a story and tell her she was brave. For the next hour, William moved through the children's ward, visiting young patients and their families. The contrast between the manufactured outrage outside and the genuine human connections inside the hospital struck him powerfully. This was why the monarchy mattered, not as a symbol of power or privilege, but as a focal point for service and compassion. Sarah's earpiece crackled with updates from the security perimeter. The protest was growing larger but remained largely peaceful. However, intelligence suggested that more militant groups were moving toward the hospital, potentially planning to escalate the confrontation. During a brief private moment, William's phone buzzed with a message from his wife. Catherine had been monitoring the situation from home, where their children were being kept away from news coverage that might upset them. Her message was simple but powerful. The country needs to see who you really are. Show them. The visit concluded with William's planned statement to the media. Standing in the hospital's main lobby, surrounded by NHS staff and patients who had volunteered to attend, he faced a battery of cameras and aggressive questions from reporters seeking inflammatory sound bites. "Your Royal Highness," called out a journalist from one of the more sensationalist newspapers. "How do you respond to allegations that you've been secretly influencing government policy through private communications with ministers?"
William had prepared for this moment. His response was measured but direct.
The royal family's communications with government are a matter of constitutional duty and tradition. Every monarch and heir for centuries has maintained dialogue with elected officials as part of our democratic system. What's been leaked represents routine ceremonial coordination, deliberately mischaracterized to create controversy. Another reporter pressed forward. "But don't the British people deserve complete transparency about how their future king interacts with their elected government?" "Absolutely," William replied, catching several journalists off guard. "Which is why I'm announcing today the establishment of an independent review panel to examine royal communications and recommend new transparency measures. The monarchy serves the people, and we must ensure that service is conducted with the openness and accountability the public deserves." The announcement shifted the narrative immediately. Instead of defending against accusations, William was taking initiative to address legitimate concerns while maintaining the dignity of the institution. Social media monitoring teams at the palace reported an immediate change in online sentiment, with many users expressing surprise and approval at the proactive response, but the victory was short-lived. As William's motorcade prepared to leave the hospital, Sarah received urgent intelligence that changed everything. "Sir," she said through her secure communication system, "we've just intercepted communications suggesting an imminent release of much more damaging material. Personal family information, financial details about your children, private medical records." The escalation was clearly designed to provoke an emotional response that would undermine the measured approach William had just demonstrated. Whoever was orchestrating these attacks understood that targeting his family would push him toward mistakes that could be exploited. William felt his composure wavering for the first time. Attacks on him were part of public life, but weaponizing information about his children crossed every line of decency. The thought of his young family being dragged into a political assault filled him with a protective fury that threatened to overwhelm his royal training. "How long do we have?" he asked. "Unknown," Sarah replied, "but the pattern suggests they're building towards something major, possibly timed for maximum impact during prime-time news coverage." As the motorcade moved through London traffic, William made a decision that would define his approach to this crisis. Instead of reacting defensively to each attack, he would need to take control of the narrative entirely. The monarchy's survival might depend on his willingness to be more open and direct than any royal had ever been before. The storm was intensifying, but William was beginning to understand that hiding from it would only ensure his destruction. If he was going to preserve the monarchy for future generations, he would need to be willing to risk everything in its defense. The secure bunker beneath Buckingham Palace had been designed for wartime, but tonight it served as the command center for a different kind of battle. William sat at the head of a conference table surrounded by the most senior members of his security and communications teams, as well as representatives from MI5 and the Metropolitan Police's counter-terrorism unit. The gravity of the situation had moved beyond palace protocol into the realm of national security. Detective Chief Inspector James Crawford from Scotland Yard's Cybercrime Unit spread digital forensics reports across the table. His team had been working around the clock to trace the source of the leaks, and their findings painted a disturbing picture of sophisticated foreign interference. "Your Royal Highness," Crawford began, "we've identified the primary source of the leaked documents. Thomas Ashford, your assistant private secretary, has been systematically copying and transmitting sensitive materials for approximately 6 months. The name hit William like a physical blow. Thomas had worked for the royal household for 8 years, gradually earning trust and access to increasingly sensitive information. He had attended family gatherings, knew intimate details about the children's schedules, and had access to financial records that could devastate the monarchy if released. "What's his motivation?" William asked, struggling to process the betrayal. "Financial compensation, certainly," Crawford replied. "But our investigation suggests he's been compromised by a foreign intelligence service. The payments to offshore accounts linked to his identity trace back through multiple shell companies to what we believe is a Russian disinformation operation." Sarah Morrison leaned forward, her face grim. "Sir, if they have 6 months of gathered intelligence, they could have enough material to sustain attacks for weeks or even months. They know your family's routines, security procedures, personal relationships, financial arrangements." The scope of the vulnerability was staggering. William realized that every private conversation, every family moment, every strategic decision made in the past half year could potentially be weaponized against them. Worse, the timing suggested this was coordinated with the Commonwealth Summit to maximize damage to Britain's international relationships. "Where is Ashford now?" William asked. "That's our most immediate problem," Crawford admitted. "He failed to report for duty this morning and hasn't been seen since yesterday evening. We've issued alerts at all ports and airports, but we suspect he may have already left the country." William's personal protection officer, Detective Inspector Morrison, activated a secure tablet showing real-time intelligence updates. "Sir, we're also tracking increased chatter from extremist Republican groups. The leaked information about your family's location and routines has them planning more aggressive demonstrations." The meeting was interrupted by an urgent message from the palace press office. The latest wave of leaked documents had just gone live on multiple websites simultaneously, and this time the content was deeply personal. Bank statements showing trust funds for William's children, private medical consultations, school records, and personal correspondence between William and Catherine about family security concerns. William felt his carefully maintained composure cracking as he read excerpts from private conversations with his wife about their children's safety and well-being. The violation was complete and systematic, turning their most intimate parental concerns into ammunition for political attack. "This ends now," he said with quiet fury. "I want options for going on the offensive." The room fell silent. Royal protocol strongly discouraged any appearance of the monarchy engaging in political combat, but William had reached his limit. Protecting his family and the institution required abandoning traditional restraint. MI5's liaison officer, a sharp-eyed woman named Director Helen Price, spoke carefully. "Your Royal Highness, we have capabilities to disrupt their digital infrastructure and trace their funding sources. But any aggressive response carries risks of escalation and international incident." "What about legal action?" William asked. The palace's senior legal counsel, Sir Geoffrey Martineau, shook his head. "The materials are being published from servers in countries without effective extradition treaties. Traditional legal remedies would take years and might never be enforceable." William stood and walked to a wall map showing global Commonwealth nations. Pins marked each country's capital, representing relationships built over generations of careful diplomatic work. The thought of those bonds being severed by manufactured scandal filled him with determination. "Then we change the game entirely," he announced. "If they want transparency, we'll give them more transparency than they can handle. But we do it on our terms." His communications director, Amanda Fletcher, looked alarmed. "Sir, complete openness could expose operational details that compromise security."
Not complete openness, William clarified.
Strategic openness. We get ahead of their narrative by controlling our own story. The plan that emerged over the next hour was unprecedented in royal history. William would give a live, unscripted television interview addressing every major allegation directly. More dramatically, he would announce the establishment of a royal transparency initiative that would proactively publish information about the monarchy's operations, finances, and decision-making processes. The risk, Sarah warned, is that this approach could expose information that creates new vulnerabilities. "The risk of doing nothing is greater," William replied. "They're destroying us slowly with selective leaks. Better to control the narrative ourselves." Preparations began immediately for a primetime broadcast from Kensington Palace. Unlike traditional royal statements, this would be a direct conversation with the British people, filmed in William's private study, surrounded by family photographs and personal mementos that humanized him beyond his formal role. While media teams prepared for the broadcast, intelligence updates continued streaming in. The foreign disinformation operation was showing signs of panic, accelerating their timeline and releasing materials more quickly than planned. This suggested they had expected the royal family to respond with traditional silent dignity, not aggressive transparency. "They're making mistakes now," Crawford observed, studying communication intercepts. "The rushed releases are sloppier, with less sophisticated presentation. They may be revealing more about their own operations." 3 hours before the broadcast, William received a call that changed everything. Thomas Ashford had been detained at Heathrow Airport attempting to board a flight to Moscow under a false identity. More importantly, he was carrying encrypted storage devices containing what appeared to be the entire archive of stolen royal documents. "He wants to negotiate," Crawford reported. "Claims he has information about the broader operation in exchange for reduced charges." William felt a grim satisfaction that his betrayer had been caught, but the larger threat remained. Even with Ashford in custody, the materials had already been distributed to multiple hostile actors who could continue the assault independently. The television broadcast began with William seated behind his desk, looking directly into the camera with the quiet confidence that had defined his public presence for years. But tonight, his usual formal reserve was replaced by something more personal and immediate. "Good evening," he began. "I'm speaking to you tonight not as the Prince of Wales, but as a father, husband, and servant of this nation who believes you deserve truth, even when that truth is uncomfortable." For the next 30 minutes, William addressed each major allegation systematically. He acknowledged that royal communications with government were extensive, but explained their constitutional necessity. He detailed the monarchy's financial arrangements, including previously private information about charitable giving and family trusts. Most importantly, he spoke directly about the impact of the attacks on his family. "My children didn't choose public life," he said, his voice carrying controlled emotion. "They deserve the protection that any British child should expect. Publishing their medical records, school information, and personal schedules isn't journalism. It's a deliberate attempt to make them vulnerable for political purposes." The broadcast concluded with an announcement that surprised even his own staff. "Effective immediately, I'm establishing the Royal Accountability Project, which will publish quarterly reports on all aspects of the monarchy's operations. If transparency is what's demanded, transparency is what you'll receive. But honest transparency that serves the public interest, not political manipulation that serves foreign adversaries." Social media response was immediate and dramatic. The hashtag #RoyalAccountability began trending, but this time with supportive messages praising William's directness and courage. International media noted the unprecedented nature of his response, with several commentators describing it as a masterclass in crisis management. But William knew the fight was far from over. In taking the offensive, he had escalated the conflict beyond anything the monarchy had ever faced. His enemies would respond with increased aggression, and the next phase would test whether the British people truly supported their royal family when the stakes were highest. As he left the studio, Sarah approached with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Sir, that was either brilliant or catastrophically dangerous." William managed his first smile in days. Sometimes there's no difference between those two things. The backlash was swift and vicious. Within hours of William's unprecedented television address, a coordinated response erupted across multiple platforms and media outlets. Foreign state-sponsored accounts amplified criticism, painting his transparency initiative as a desperate attempt to maintain an outdated institution. More concerning, several prominent British politicians began questioning whether the monarchy's time had passed entirely. In the Secure Communications Centre at Kensington Palace, intelligence updates painted an alarming picture of escalation. Sarah Morrison reviewed overnight reports with growing unease as she prepared to brief William on the developing situation. "Sir," she said as he entered the briefing room at dawn, "the response has been more aggressive than we anticipated. They're not just continuing the information warfare, they're escalating to physical threats." The screens around the room displayed a coordinated campaign that had emerged overnight. Protests were planned for every major city in the United Kingdom, with particular focus on disrupting the Commonwealth Summit preparation meetings. More seriously, specific threats had been made against royal family members, including detailed knowledge of security arrangements that suggested the compromise went deeper than Thomas Ashford alone. "How many others?" William asked grimly. Detective Chief Inspector Crawford joined the briefing via secure video link from Scotland Yard's headquarters. "Our investigation of Ashford's contacts has revealed at least 3 additional palace staff members with suspicious financial activity. We're conducting arrests as we speak, but sir, The depth of this infiltration suggests years of careful planning. William absorbed this information while studying protest footage from overnight demonstrations in Edinburgh and Manchester. The crowds were larger and more organized than previous gatherings, with professional coordination evident in their messaging and timing. But more troubling was the presence of individuals his security team had identified as foreign operatives. This isn't just about the monarchy anymore, William realized. They're using us as a lever to destabilize the entire governmental system. Sir Geoffrey Martineau, the palace's chief legal advisor, arrived with emergency legislation that had been drafted overnight. Your Royal Highness, the Prime Minister has prepared orders that would impose significant restrictions on foreign-funded political activities. But implementing them would require royal assent, which puts you directly in the political firing line. The trap was now fully visible. By forcing the monarchy to choose between self-preservation and constitutional neutrality, William's enemies had created a no-win scenario. Signing the orders would validate claims of royal political interference, while refusing to sign would leave the attacks unchecked. William's phone rang with an encrypted call from his father. King Charles had been monitoring the situation from Balmoral, where he had retreated to avoid appearing to interfere with his son's handling of the crisis. But the escalation had reached a point where royal family coordination was essential. William. The king's voice carried the weight of decades of constitutional experience. I've been in contact with the cabinet secretary. The government is prepared to invoke emergency powers, but they need our explicit support. This decision will define how the monarchy operates for generations. The choice before William was starker than any his predecessors had faced. Previous constitutional crises had involved genuine political differences within Britain's democratic system. This attack came from outside the system entirely, designed to exploit democratic principles to destroy democratic institutions. I need to see the intelligence assessment, William told his father. All of it. An hour later, William sat in a secure reading room reviewing classified materials that painted the full scope of the operation against the British monarchy. The evidence showed coordination between foreign intelligence services, extremist political groups, and compromised palace staff stretching back over 3 years. The goal wasn't just to embarrass the royal family, it was to create sufficient constitutional crisis to undermine Britain's influence in international affairs. The Commonwealth Summit had been chosen as the target because it represented Britain's soft power projection through historical relationships. Destroying confidence in the monarchy would weaken those bonds and potentially fracture the Commonwealth entirely, reducing Britain's global influence and creating opportunities for adversarial nations to expand their own spheres of control. Director Helen Price from MI5 provided the most sobering assessment. Your Royal Highness, this operation represents one of the most sophisticated attacks on British institutions we've ever documented. The investment in time, money, and human resources suggests state-level sponsorship with strategic objectives extending far beyond damaging the monarchy. William understood that his response would echo through history. Every monarch had faced existential challenges, but none had faced an enemy that could weaponize the very openness and democratic values that made modern monarchy possible. His decision was interrupted by urgent news from the palace press office. A final wave of leaked materials had been released, this time including forged documents mixed with authentic ones. The forgeries were sophisticated enough to pass initial scrutiny, but contained information that would be devastating if believed. Fabricated evidence of financial corruption, fictional political interference, and completely invented personal scandals. They're counting on the confusion, Amanda Fletcher explained as she showed William the mixture of real and fabricated materials. By the time independent verification can separate truth from lies, the damage will be permanent. William realized this was the moment of maximum danger and maximum opportunity. The inclusion of obvious forgeries gave him the evidence needed to discredit the entire operation, but only if he could prove their falseness before public opinion solidified around the fabricated narrative. Contact every major news editor in the country, he instructed Amanda. I want a press conference in 2 hours with full forensic documentation proving which documents are forged. Sarah Morrison looked alarmed. Sir, that timeline doesn't allow for proper security vetting of the venue. Then we do it here, William replied. In the throne room. If we're going to make a stand for truth, we do it in the heart of the institution we're defending. The next 2 hours were a frenzy of preparation unlike anything in royal history. Forensic experts, MI5 technical specialists, and international authentication authorities worked together to create irrefutable evidence of document forgery. Meanwhile, security teams prepared Buckingham Palace for a press conference that would host potentially hostile international media. William used the time to call Commonwealth leaders personally, explaining the situation and asking for their patience while Britain dealt with what he described as an unprecedented attack on our democratic institutions by foreign adversaries. The responses were mixed, but generally supportive. Several leaders expressed concern about their own vulnerability to similar operations, recognizing that attacking British institutions was a test case for broader destabilization efforts. As journalists filled the throne room, William felt the weight of 11 centuries of royal history. Every king and queen who had sat on the throne behind him had faced their own defining moments. Today was his. He began the press conference with a declaration that silenced the room. Ladies and gentlemen, the United Kingdom is under attack, not by military forces, but by a sophisticated disinformation operation designed to destroy confidence in our institutions and fracture our international relationships. For the next hour, William systematically dismantled the latest wave of accusations using forensic evidence, technical analysis, and witness testimony. He revealed the foreign funding sources, the network of compromised staff members, and the strategic objectives behind the operation. Most dramatically, he announced that several other Commonwealth nations had been targeted by similar operations, confirming a coordinated assault on the entire system of relationships Britain had built over generations. "This isn't about me, my family, or even the monarchy," William concluded. "This is about whether democratic institutions can defend themselves against adversaries who exploit our openness as weakness. Today, we prove they can." The response was immediate and decisive. International media, provided with irrefutable evidence of foreign manipulation, shifted coverage from royal scandal to national security threat. Public opinion polls showed dramatic movement towards supporting the monarchy as a victim of foreign attack rather than a source of domestic problems. Most importantly, Commonwealth leaders rallied to Britain's support, recognizing that the attack on the royal family was really an attack on the relationships they all valued. Several announced enhanced security cooperation and joint initiatives to combat foreign disinformation. As the press conference ended, William felt something he hadn't experienced in weeks: hope. The enemy had overplayed their hand by including forgeries, giving him the evidence needed to expose their entire operation. But he knew the victory was incomplete. Sarah approached with the final intelligence update of the crisis. "Sir, we've traced the operations command structure. Thomas Ashford was just one node in a network spanning multiple countries. We've disrupted this particular attack, but the capability remains." William nodded, understanding that this battle was won, but the war for truth in the digital age would continue. The monarchy had survived by adapting to new challenges while maintaining its core purpose. Today's crisis would require similar evolution. "The Transparency Initiative becomes permanent," he announced to his team. "If they want to attack us with selective information, we defend ourselves with complete information. The British people deserve nothing less." The transformation of the monarchy had begun not by choice, but by necessity. William had learned that in the modern world, institutions could only maintain legitimacy through constant engagement with the public they served. The age of dignified silence had ended. The age of active accountability had begun. 3 weeks after the press conference that changed everything, William stood on the balcony of Buckingham Palace watching the preparations for the Commonwealth Summit. The scene below represented more than diplomatic protocol. It was a testament to institutional resilience and the power of truth to overcome sophisticated deception. The flags of 54 nations lined the mall, each representing a relationship that had survived the coordinated assault designed to fracture them. Commonwealth leaders had not only attended the summit but had used it as an opportunity to strengthen their bonds with Britain and each other. The crisis had forged new levels of cooperation and mutual support. Sarah Morrison joined him on the balcony, her expression reflecting the cautious optimism that had replaced the crisis mentality of recent weeks. "Sir, the final intelligence assessment confirms we've disrupted the primary operation. Thomas Ashford and 6 others are in custody, and international cooperation has helped us trace and freeze the funding networks." The investigation's findings had validated William's decision to go on the offensive. The operation against the monarchy had been even more extensive than initially suspected, with tentacles reaching into multiple government departments, media organizations, and civil society groups. But the aggressive transparency response had exposed the manipulation so completely that it discredited not just the specific attacks but the broader disinformation ecosystem that had enabled them. "What about ongoing threats?" William asked. "Reduced but not eliminated," Sarah replied honestly. "The capability for future operations remains, but the cost-benefit analysis has shifted dramatically. This operation failed so spectacularly that similar attacks are less likely in the near term." William nodded, understanding that security would always be an evolving challenge. But the fundamental relationship between the monarchy and the British people had emerged stronger from the crisis. Public support for the royal family had reached levels not seen since the immediate aftermath of the Queen's Diamond Jubilee. More importantly, the Transparency Initiative had fundamentally changed how the monarchy operated. Quarterly reports now detailed everything from official expenses to charitable activities to the decision-making process behind public engagements. The Royal Accountability Project had become a model that other constitutional monarchies were studying and adapting. Detective Chief Inspector Crawford arrived with the final arrest report. "Your Royal Highness, we've completed the roundup of the domestic network, 12 individuals in total, ranging from palace staff to journalists to political activists. The evidence suggests this was a 5-year operation with investments reaching into the millions of pounds." The scope still amazed William. Someone had spent enormous resources over half a decade to destroy an institution that served primarily ceremonial and charitable functions. The strategic thinking behind such an investment spoke to the monarchy's importance as a symbol of British continuity and international relationships. "Any indication of future operations?" William asked. "Intelligence suggests they're reassessing their approach," Crawford replied. The failure of this operation, combined with the international attention it brought to foreign disinformation efforts, has made similar tactics much riskier. Your response essentially turned their weapon against them. William reflected on the lessons learned through the crisis. Traditional royal reserve and dignified silence had been appropriate for an earlier era, but modern threats required modern responses. The monarchy's survival had depended on its willingness to abandon outdated protocols in favor of direct engagement with the public. His phone buzzed with a message from Catherine, who was preparing to join him for the evening's Commonwealth reception. She had been his anchor throughout the crisis, providing personal support while managing the impact on their children. The message simply read, "Proud of you. See you soon." The personal cost of the crisis was still being calculated. His children had been forced to understand concepts of political warfare and foreign manipulation that no young person should need to comprehend. Security arrangements for the family had been permanently enhanced, and the easy informality that had characterized their private lives was now constrained by operational necessities. But there had been unexpected benefits as well. The Transparency Initiative had humanized the monarchy in ways that decades of careful public relations could never have achieved. British people now understood not just the ceremonial duties of royal life, but the extensive charitable work, the careful constitutional navigation, and the genuine personal sacrifices involved in service to the nation. Ambassador Patricia Wells, who had coordinated the Commonwealth response to the crisis, arrived with her final diplomatic assessment. "Your Royal Highness, the summit has exceeded all expectations. Not only has attendance remained complete, but several leaders have proposed enhanced cooperation mechanisms specifically citing the unity demonstrated during recent events." The irony was profound. An operation designed to fracture British international relationships had instead strengthened them by creating shared resistance to foreign manipulation. Commonwealth nations had discovered they faced similar threats and could benefit from coordinated responses. "The South African president specifically mentioned your Transparency Initiative as a model for democratic accountability," Ambassador Wells continued. "Several other leaders are considering similar approaches in their own contexts." William smiled at the thought that a crisis forced upon him had created tools that others found useful. The Royal Accountability Project was already being studied by constitutional scholars and democratic institutions worldwide as an example of how traditional authority could adapt to modern expectations of openness. As evening approached, the Commonwealth reception began in the ballroom below. William could hear the conversations of leaders, diplomats, and civil society representatives who had gathered to celebrate relationships that spanned continents and cultures. The formal agenda included discussions of trade, climate change, and regional security, but the underlying theme was resilience in the face of attempts to divide democratic nations. Prime Minister Stevens found William as he prepared to join the reception. "Your Royal Highness, I wanted to personally thank you for your handling of this crisis. The Cabinet agrees that your response not only saved the monarchy, but potentially strengthened our entire democratic framework." The Prime Minister's words carried particular weight because they represented the judgment of elected officials who had no obligation to support the monarchy beyond its constitutional utility. Their endorsement suggested that William's approach had served broader national interests rather than narrow institutional ones. "The real test," William replied, "will be whether we've learned enough to prevent similar attacks in the future. The new Joint Task Force on Foreign Disinformation should help with that," the Prime Minister noted. "Your experience has informed security protocols that will protect all our institutions."
As William descended to the ballroom, he reflected on the transformation he had undergone. 3 weeks earlier, he had been a relatively traditional royal, following established protocols and maintaining appropriate distance from political controversies.
The crisis had forced him to become something new, a public figure who engaged directly with national challenges while maintaining constitutional neutrality. The reception was a celebration, but also a demonstration. Every handshake, every conversation, every smile represented relationships that had survived systematic assault. The Commonwealth leaders who had stood by Britain during the crisis were now partners in a deeper understanding of shared democratic values and mutual protection. Catherine joined him as the formal toasts began, her presence a reminder that the personal and institutional dimensions of royal life could never be completely separated. Their children's future would be shaped by the decisions made during this crisis, and their inheritance would include both the burden and the strength that came from surviving this test. The final toast of the evening was proposed by the Canadian Prime Minister, whose country had been specifically targeted for Republican sentiment during the crisis. To institutions that bend but do not break, to relationships that strengthen under pressure, and to the truth that ultimately prevails over sophisticated lies. As the ballroom raised their glasses, William understood that he had not just defended the monarchy, but had helped define what democratic resilience looked like in the digital age. The crisis had ended, but the vigilance it demanded would be permanent. The new dawn breaking over Britain was not just the end of a particular threat, but the beginning of a new understanding of how traditional institutions could adapt to serve modern democracy. The storm had passed, but it had left the monarchy fundamentally changed. More open, more accountable, and paradoxically more secure, because of its willingness to embrace transparency. Standing in the ballroom surrounded by allies and partners, William knew that the crown he would one day inherit would be different from the one his predecessors had worn. It would be a crown earned through crisis, strengthened by transparency, and secured by the trust of people who had seen their future king tested and not found wanting. The transformation was complete and the future had begun. Prince William takes command. Royal Guard shields future king amid explosive 2026 scandals.